It was almost midnight when the first knock rattled the front door of the Ramirez home. Not a polite tap, not a hesitant ring of the bell, but a heavy, authoritative pounding that made the framed photos on the hallway wall tremble. Maria Ramirez froze where she stood in the kitchen, a mug of chamomile tea still steaming in her hands. Who knocks like that at this hour? Who even comes to this neighborhood after dark? She set the mug down carefully, the ceramic clink sounding like thunder in the silence, and felt her stomach twist with an anxiety she couldn't quite name. Her 8-year-old son, Daniel, stirred upstairs, calling down in a sleepy voice. "Mom? Who is it?" She forced her voice steady. "Stay in bed, honey. I'll check." But even as she spoke, she knew her voice carried something it never had before: fear. The pounding came again, louder, more insistent. She approached the door slowly, her bare feet cold against the wooden floor, and peered through the peephole. Flashing red and blue lights cut across her front yard. Police. 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch, hands poised, expressions unreadable in the warped fisheye glass. Her first thought, there must have been an accident. Maybe the old couple. Across the street? Maybe a break-in? But why here? Why her door? She hesitated, heart racing, then opened the door just a crack. "Yes, Mrs. Ramirez?" The taller officer's tone was clipped, professional. "We need to ask you a few questions. May we come in?" Maria blinked, confusion fighting panic. "What's this about?" The shorter officer's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, we'd prefer to do this inside." Behind them, the cruiser's lights painted the quiet street in pulses of red and blue. Neighbors' curtains twitched. Someone was watching. Maria's throat went dry. If it was routine, why at midnight? She opened the door wider, letting them step in. The taller officer scanned the room as if cataloging every corner, while the other pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "Where were you tonight between 9 and 11 p.m.? He asked flatly. Maria frowned. "Oh, I put my son to bed. At 9, then I was reading." "Why?" The officer scribbled something down without looking at her. "Did you see or hear anything unusual across the street tonight?" Maria's mind flicked to the house directly opposite hers, the house of Ellen Porter, her elderly neighbor and occasional babysitter. "No, Wait, is Ellen okay?" The officers exchanged a glance, and something in her chest sank. The taller one cleared his throat. "Mrs. Porter was found deceased in her living room at approximately 10:30. There are signs of struggle." Maria's hand flew to her mouth. "Ellen? Sweet Ellen who left cookies on her porch every holiday? Ellen who had helped Daniel with his math homework just last week. Gone? Murdered?" The words wouldn't fit. But before she could even process, the officer added, "Your fingerprints were found on the glass table near her body." Maria's world tilted. "What? That's impossible." Her voice cracked, half shout, half plea. "I haven't been in her house since last weekend when she lent me a book. Of course my prince would be there. She gave me lemonade. We talked in the living room." Her words came out too fast, too desperate, even to her own ears. The shorter officer's expression hardened. "Then you admit you were in her house recently?" "Yes, but—" She stopped herself. Every syllable felt like a trap. From the staircase, Daniel's voice carried again, frightened this time. "Mom? What's happening?" Both officers glanced upward. Maria felt protective instinct surge hot in her chest. "Please," she whispered, lowering her voice. "Don't do this here. My son he doesn't need to see." But the taller officer interrupted, his words cold steel. "Mrs. Ramirez, you need to come with us." "No!" The protest ripped out of her throat before she could stop it. "This is a mistake. I didn't—" The officer cut her off. "You have the right." To remain silent, Maria's knees buckled. Miranda rights. The sound felt unreal, like TV dialogue bleeding into her living room. She stumbled back, shaking her head. "No, please, listen to me. I didn't hurt her. I loved Ellen. She was like family." Her words bounced off their uniforms like rubber. Bullets. One of them reached for cuffs. Daniel's footsteps pounded down the stairs. "Mom!" He cried, his small hands gripping the railing, eyes wide with terror. Maria twisted toward him, tears blurring her vision. "Stay upstairs, baby. It's going to be okay." But the lie burned her throat. How could it be okay with cold metal closing around her wrists, with her neighbor dead, with the whole world suddenly pointing at her? The officers led her toward the door. Neighbors stood on their porches now, drawn by the lights and voices. She heard whispers, saw phone cameras. Raised, "They think I did this. They already believe." She ducked her head, shame and fury colliding, the cuffs biting into her skin. "Mom!" Daniel screamed from the doorway, but a cop held him back. "Stay inside, kid." The cruiser door slammed shut on her protest, her pleas, her life as... She knew it died inside the car. Maria's thoughts spiraled. How could her fingerprints, innocent fingerprints from a friendly visit, be twisted into chains? Who wanted this? Why Ellen? Why tonight? Why her? The questions clawed at her. Louder than the siren, they finally cut the silence. Was this a mistake? A cruel coincidence? Or something darker, something placed, planted, designed? The officers didn't speak. Their silence screamed louder than... Accusations dotted the station. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they processed her, ink staining her fingers, cameras snapping her mugshot. She stared at her own reflection in the glass partition. Disheveled hair, tear-stained cheeks, eyes that didn't look like hers anymore. "You'll want to call an attorney," the booking officer muttered, sliding a form across the counter. She clutched it, her hands trembling. An attorney? With what money? Ellen had always said, "Maria, you're too honest for your own good." And now honesty had landed her in a cell. When they locked her in, she sank onto the cold bench, head in her hands. Daniel's face hovered in her mind, wide-eyed and broken. What will happen to him? She whispered to nobody. A female guard passing by shot her a pitying look. Child services until family comes forward. Maria's stomach twisted. She had no family nearby, no one to shield him. She pressed her back against the cinder block wall, forcing her breath to slow. Questions piled higher and higher. If her prints were the only evidence, why act so fast? Why the midnight arrest, the rush, the public display? Had someone already decided she was guilty before the first knock? And if so, who planted the idea and why? In the echoing silence of the holding cell, Maria realized something chilling. She wasn't just being accused. She was being framed. And the real killer, whoever they were, was still out there, watching, waiting, maybe smiling at the chaos. The cell door clanged open just after sunrise, the metallic scrape echoing down the corridor like a sentence being carved into stone. Maria hadn't slept. She sat rigid on the cold bench, her mind cycling through fragments of memories. Gentle laugh, Daniel's sleepy goodnight, the sharp bite of handcuffs. When the officer barked, "On your feet?" her body obeyed before her mind caught up. She stumbled out into the hallway, fluorescent lights bleaching her face pale. Her wrists were cuffed again, chained tight enough to bite. They marched her into a small interrogation room. The walls were bare, painted a tired beige. A camera blinked red in the corner. Across the table sat Detective Harris, mid-40s, a square jaw and eyes like granite. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He slid a folder across the table. Inside, crime scene photos spilled like accusations. Ellen Porter's living room, overturned table, broken glass, a shadowed shape under a sheet. Maria's breath caught. her stomach revolting. "Why are you showing me this?" she whispered. Harris leaned forward. "Because that's where your fingerprints were. On that table. On that glass." Maria's throat closed. "She invited me over last weekend. She poured me lemonade. We sat at that table. That's why my prints are there. You know that doesn't mean I—" Harris cut her off with a flat palm. "Save it for court. The lab matched your prints, and that's enough to hold you." He pushed a pen toward her. "Do yourself a favor. Tell us what really happened. You argued with her? It got heated? You didn't mean for it to go that far?" His voice was smooth, rehearsed, like a script. Maria shook her head, eyes wide. "No, there was no fight. She was my friend. You're twisting this." The door opened, and another figure slipped in detective. Collins' younger, sharper suit, eyes darting like a man, measuring the distance between lies and truth. He set a tablet down, pressing play. Grainy surveillance footage flickered. A blurry figure entering Ellen's house around 10 p.m., the timestamp burned in the corner. "That's you," Collins said. Maria leaned forward, squinting. The image was smeared, distorted by shadows and poor resolution. The figure could have been anyone of her height, anyone with dark hair. "That's not me," she whispered. "I was home putting my son to bed." "Ask him," asked. Harris scoffed. "An 8-year-old isn't an alibi." Maria's pulse pounded in her ears. "You're wrong. This is wrong." But even as she protested, doubt slithered into her gut. Who was that figure? And how did they know Ellen's house? Harris snapped the folder shut. "You'll be formally charged this afternoon. Homicide. 2nd degree at least, maybe 1st. You should think about a deal." He stood, chair scraping. Collins followed. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Maria gasping in the silence. Hours blurred. They fingerprinted her again, photographed her again, marched her through hallways that smelled of bleach and despair. By noon, they led her into a courtroom packed with reporters. Flashbulbs exploded as she shuffled in, shackled, head bowed. The DA's office wasted no time. They announced to the cameras, "We have our suspect. Justice will be swift." Maria's heart shattered at the words. She wasn't just accused. She was condemned before a jury even existed. From the corner of her eye, she saw neighbors in the gallery. Mrs. Jenkins, who once brought soup when Maria had the flu, now stared with open disgust. Mr. Lewis, who waved every morning, shook his head as if betrayed. Phones were raised, recording her shame. She wanted to scream, "I didn't do this." But she knew how it would sound. Desperation always sounded like guilt. Later, in a holding cell beneath the courthouse, she asked to call Daniel. The guard shook his head. "Kids with social services until families arranged. You'll have your chance." Her chest constricted, panic clawing. "He's 8. He doesn't understand what's happening. Please." The guard's expression didn't change. "Sit down." The bench was colder than before, but Maria barely felt it. She imagined Daniel's face, wide-eyed, searching for her, asking strangers where his mom was. The thought nearly broke her. That evening, she finally saw the local news broadcast on the cell block TV. Her mugshot flashed on screen, the anchor's voice solemn. Police have arrested 32-year-old Maria Ramirez in connection with the murder of her neighbor, Ellen Porter. Sources say fingerprints and possible surveillance footage link her to the scene. She is being held without bail. Maria's stomach turned. The photo they used made her look harsh, hollow-eyed, unrecognizable. Below it, the Chiron screamed, "Neighbor from hell?" The segment cut to man-on-the-street interviews. A woman said, "She always seemed quiet, but you never know." Another voice added, "I saw cops at her place last month. Shady stuff." Maria shook her head violently. Lies, distortions. She wanted to claw the screen. Harris had said, "Save it for court." But the court of public opinion had already handed down its sentence doc as night fell. She tried to piece together scraps of defense in her mind. Ellen's kindness, the last book she'd lent, the laughter of their last conversation. Who would want Ellen dead? Who had the motive, the rage, the opportunity? And why point the finger at Maria? The more she thought, the more it smelled deliberate. Someone wanted her destroyed. But who? Her public defender arrived the next morning, a weary man in his 50s, with a briefcase that looked older than she was. He sat across from her in a glass-walled room, his tie loosened, his eyes tired. "I'm Mark Hughes," he said. "You've been charged with second-degree murder. They'll try to upgrade it if they can. The evidence is circumstantial, but it's strong enough to hold." Maria leaned forward, desperation pouring out. "It's not me. I didn't do this. Ellen was my friend." Hughes nodded slowly, not dismissive but not surprised. "Most of my clients say that." She gripped the table. "No, listen, they're framing me. The prints, they're old. The video, it's not me. Please, you have to believe me." He studied her for a long moment, then scribbled notes. "If there's a framed job, we'll need proof. Hard proof. Otherwise, the jury won't care." Maria's voice trembled. "The police. They're too quick. They had this case tied with a bow in hours." "Doesn't that seem strange?" Hughes didn't answer directly. Strange doesn't win cases. Evidence does. I'll do what I can. He slid a business card across the table. "Don't talk to anyone else about the case. Not inmates, not guards, no one. Everything can be twisted." When he left, Maria pressed her forehead to the glass. She could feel the walls closing in, the story already written in headlines. Her life, Daniel's life, had been hijacked by fingerprints on a table, by grainy footage, by neighbors' whispers. And the worst part was knowing the truth wasn't enough. She needed someone to fight for her. But who would believe the word of a single mother branded a killer against the word of a police department parading her as their victory? Back in her cell, she heard guards talking. "Day-I wants this one fast," one muttered. "Make the public forget the Porter case mess." The other laughed. "Well, they've got their scapegoat." Maria's blood ran cold. Scapegoat. The word echoed through her skull. Was that what she was now? A convenient mask to hide someone else's crime? She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Hold on, Daniel. I'll fight. Somehow, I'll fight." But as the cell door clanged shut again, the question gnawed at her. How do you fight when the very people sworn to protect justice are the ones painting you guilty? The first week inside the county jail stretched like an eternity for Maria. Days blurred into a haze of fluorescent lights, metallic clanging, and the constant hum of other women's voices, shouts, whispers, sobs. The food was tasteless her. Sleep was restless, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face pressed against the window of the squad car, his mouth forming the word "Mom," over and over like a wound that refused to close. But beneath the numb routine, a flicker of something sharper grew. Anger, suspicion, a refusal to accept that her life could be signed away by a few fingerprints and a blurry video. Her attorney, Mark Hughes, returned that Thursday with a thick folder under his arm and the look of a man who had spent too many nights reading things that didn't add up. He sat across from her in the visiting room, tapping the file with 2 fingers. "I've reviewed discovery," he said, "and something stinks." Maria leaned forward, clinging to the words. "What did you find?" Hughes opened the file and spread copies of reports across the table. First, the fingerprint analysis. "The report says your prints were lifted from Ellen Porter's glass table at the scene. But look here." He pointed to a timestamp on the lab paperwork. The analysis was logged at 11:04 p.m. The problem? Ellen's body wasn't even discovered until 10:45. That means they identified your prints and matched them in less than 20 minutes. Impossible. Labs don't work that fast, especially at night. Maria's chest tightened. So, what does that mean? Hughes lowered his voice, glancing around the room, though no one else was near. It means either the report is fabricated, or they already had your prints in the system, and someone wanted your name on that report immediately. Either way, it's not standard procedure. Maria's heart pounded. So you believe me? Hughes hesitated. I believe something isn't right. But belief isn't enough. We need more. He slid another paper forward. Second, the surveillance footage. They claim you were seen entering Ellen's house at 10:02 p.m., but the footage has no clear facial identification. The figure is blurred. The gait analysis is inconclusive, and yet the police report states with absolute certainty that it's you. No mention of margins of error, no acknowledgement of doubt. That's unusual, especially for evidence this weak. Maria swallowed hard. They don't care if it's weak. They just want me guilty. Hughes met her eyes. That's what worries. The next day, Maria got her first taste of how quickly narratives spread inside jail. In the cafeteria, two women at the next table pointed and whispered, "That's the neighbor killer. They say she snapped." Another muttered, "Heard she poisoned cookies. Crazy bee asterisk 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 H." Maria dropped her tray, appetite gone. She tried to speak, to correct them, but her voice felt small in the roaring tide of rumor. By the end of the week, she was known only as the woman who killed the old lady across the street. One night, as she returned from the showers, she found a scrap of paper slipped under her cell door. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The words were scrawled in angry, jagged pen. "Keep your mouth shut or your kid pays." Maria's vision blurred. Her knees buckled, and she gripped the wall for balance. She showed it to a guard, but he shrugged. Inmates mess with each other all the time. Don't take it seriously. But Maria knew better. The handwriting was too deliberate. The threat was too personal. Someone outside wanted her silence, and they were willing to scare her through. Daniel. When Hughes returned, she shoved the note across the table before he even sat down. "This isn't just a mistake," she hissed. "This is a setup. Someone is trying to shut me up." Hughes studied the note, his brow furrowing. Could be intimidation, could be real. Either way, I'll file it. He slipped it into his folder, but Maria caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. Then he leaned forward. "Listen, I dug deeper into Ellen Porter's autopsy. The official report says she died from blunt force trauma around 10:15 p.m., but the coroner's notes, handwritten, not meant for the public's lividity, suggests she may have died earlier. Maybe as early as 9:30. That undercuts the whole timeline. If she was dead before 10, then the surveillance footage showing someone entering her house after that is meaningless." "She was already gone," Maria gasped. "So they know the timeline is wrong?" Hughes nodded grimly. "And they're ignoring it, which tells me they're protecting something or someone." Maria's pulse hammered in her throat. "But why me? Why pick me?" Hughes didn't answer right away. He rubbed his temples, then said, "Because you're convenient. Single mom, no money for private counsel, close enough to leave prints, visible enough to calm the public. You're an easy narrative." His words landed like stones. Easy narrative. That was all her life had been reduced to a headline. Days later, the prosecution held a press conference. Maria watched it on the communal TV, heart pounding as Ada James Keller stood before reporters, flanked by detectives Harris and Collins. The people of this city can rest assured, Keller said smoothly. We have strong evidence linking the defendant to this heinous crime. We will not allow violence to go unanswered. Reporters peppered him with questions, but Keller dodged each one with polished ease. Not once did he mention the timeline discrepancies or the lack of facial identification in the video. Instead, he leaned hard on her fingerprints. The defendant's unique prints were found at the scene of the crime, in proximity to the victim. That is scientific fact. Maria wanted to scream at the TV. They were old prints. Everyone knows Ellen invited me over. But the guards turned the volume down, silencing her protests. That night, Hughes called her from his office. His voice was tense. They're pushing for indictment next week. We need more than technicalities. We need a crack big enough to split their whole case. Maria's hands shook as she gripped the phone. How do we find that? Hughes hesitated, then said, We'll start with Ellen's background. Who else had reason to want her gone? Who benefits from this? Because if you didn't do it, and I'm starting to believe you didn't, then someone did. And right now, they're free while you sit here. Maria pressed her forehead against the glass of the phone partition, tears slipping down her cheeks. I can't lose my son to this. I can't. Hughes's voice softened. Then we fight. But you need to be ready, Maria, because once we start digging, they'll come harder. They'll try to bury us both. As she hung up the phone, Maria caught her reflection in the glass eyes red, hair tangled, but something burning in her. Expression. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was defiance. They could smear her, isolate her, even threaten her child. But she knew now, with absolute clarity, that this wasn't incompetence. It was orchestration. Someone had chosen her to carry this crime, and they weren't going to stop until she was silenced. The cracks in the case were there, small, fragile, but real. And Maria swore to herself in that moment that she would pry them open, no matter what it cost. The jail grew colder as fall deepened, the nights longer, the air seeping through cracks in the concrete walls. Maria wrapped herself in the thin blanket issued to her, but it did nothing against the chill that had settled in her bones since Ellen's death. Every sound seemed amplified in the stillness. The clang of doors, the shuffle of guards, the low murmurs of inmates, plotting or praying in the dark. And every night, as she lay awake on the hard cot, she felt the same questions. Gnawed her insides. Who really killed Ellen? And why had they chosen her as the scapegoat? Her cellmate, a wiry woman named Carla with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, leaned against the bars one night and whispered, "You should be careful who you trust." Maria sat up, wary. "What do you mean?" Carla smirked, her teeth flashing. In the dim light, people talk. Guards talk. Word is, this case of yours people higher up want it tied up neat. Quick, no loose ends. She tapped her temple. Loose ends get cut. Maria's blood ran cold. Higher up, like the D? Carla shrugged, theatrically innocent. I didn't say names. But don't be surprised if things keep going missing. Or if people stop talking. The next morning, her suspicions grew. Hughes visited with grim news. He dropped a manila folder. On the table, his expression a mix of frustration and dread. I requested Ellen Porter's full file from the police archives. Witness statements, forensics, everything. But sections are missing. Maria frowned. Missing? Hughes nodded. Whole chunks. There was a neighbor down the block report. Says he heard shouting around 10, but his statement is gone. Just a placeholder page. And the initial forensics report on the glass table vanished, replaced by the rushed one we already saw. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. This isn't sloppy. This is intentional. Maria's chest tightened. So they're hiding things. Hughes's voice dropped to a low rasp. Yes, but proving that is harder. A missing document could be an error. A lost file could be misfiling. To show deliberate suppression, we'd need someone inside to admit it. His eyes flicked to her, heavy with unspoken meaning. Or someone willing to risk a lot. Back in her cell, Maria replayed Hughes's words. Someone inside. But who would risk crossing the department? The police protected their own. To question them was to invite exile or worse. That night, as she sat in the common area, an older inmate shuffled past her and muttered under his breath, "You're not the first. Won't be the last," Maria turned sharply. What? But the man had already melted back into the crowd, his hunched, shoulders disappearing through the doorway. She shivered, wondering how much of the truth was buried in whispers. No one dared to shout not days later. The threats escalated. A guard tossed her a tray at lunch, and when she lifted the cover, the words "Drop IT" were scrawled in ketchup across the mashed potatoes. Her stomach lurched, appetite gone. She pushed the tray away, but the message burned into her mind. Someone had access. Someone close. She couldn't trust the food, the guards, maybe not even the other inmates. That night, while waiting for lockdown, a shadow approached her in the dim hallway. It was Carla again, eyes darting, voice low. "There's someone you should talk to." Cell block D old man named Riley. Claims he knows things. About cops. About cases that don't add up. Maria hesitated. "Why tell me?" Carla smirked. "Because I like watching the show. And honey, you're the only show in here worth watching." With that, she disappeared into her cell, leaving Maria rattled thought the next day, during recreation. Maria spotted Riley thin, gray-haired, his face etched with decades of secrets. He sat alone on a bench, staring at the cracked concrete. Gathering her courage, she approached. "Riley?" His eyes flicked up, sharp despite the years. "Depends who's asking." She swallowed hard. "Maria Ramirez. I was told you might know about cops." He let out a humorless chuckle. "Cops? I know plenty. Which kind? The ones that screw up? Or the ones that cover up?" Her heart raced. "The ones that cover up." Riley leaned closer, his breath sour but his words sharp. "They've done it before, pinning crimes on the easy ones. Immigrants, single moms, outsiders, makes the press happy, keeps the numbers clean. I seen 3 guys go down that way in the 90s. One's still in here." Maria's skin prickled. "Why are you telling me this?" Riley's gaze hardened. "Because I heard your neighbor was about to testify in a case. Something tied to the cops. Then she winds up dead, and you conveniently get nailed for it. You think that's coincidence?" Maria's breath caught. "Ellen testifying? In what case?" Riley shrugged, didn't catch the details, but she was gonna talk. Against someone with a badge. Then she ends up with a sheet over her. Do the math. His words hit like a hammer. Ellen gentle. Kind Ellen mixed up in something bigger than either of them? And silenced before she could speak? Back in her cell, Maria trembled as she pieced it together. Ellen had mentioned something weeks ago, papers she was organizing, meetings downtown. Maria had thought it was volunteer work. But what if it wasn't? What if Ellen had stumbled into corruption, and now Maria was paying the price for being in the wrong place, with the wrong fingerprints at the wrong time? When Hughes visited again, Maria blurted it out. Ellen was testifying. Riley told me. She was going to expose something about the cops. Hughes raised an eyebrow, skeptical but intrigued. If that's true, it changes everything. But we need evidence, not jailhouse whispers. Maria slammed her palms on the table, desperation flaring. Then find it. Look into her calendar, her phone records, anything, please. Hughes scribbled notes, his jaw tight. I'll try. But if the police buried this, it won't be easy. They'll guard it like their own skin. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building felt like footsteps coming for her. Every shadow seemed like a warning. But beneath the fear, a grim determination grew. If Ellen had died trying to bring the truth to light, Maria owed it to her friend to survive long enough to finish what she started. Still, the questions multiplied. Who in the department wanted Ellen silenced? Why frame Maria instead of someone else? And if Hughes dug deep enough, would he find the proof, or would he vanish like the missing files? In the suffocating dark of her cell, Maria whispered to herself, "They can bury files. They can bury me. But they can't bury the truth. Forever." Yet even as she said it, she wondered if she believed it. Because in this place, truth felt like the most fragile thing of all. The rain was relentless that Friday, streaking the courthouse windows as if the sky itself was trying to wash away the lies that had been written into Maria's life. Hughes arrived at the jail, soaked to the bone, his hair plastered against his forehead, his briefcase clutched like it carried dynamite. When Maria saw his face through the glass partition of the visiting room, her stomach flipped. He wasn't just tired. He was electrified, eyes wide, jaw tight, the look of a man who had stumbled onto something big enough to change everything. He didn't even sit before dropping a stack of photocopies onto the table between them. "Maria," he said, voice low and urgent, "I found it. Or rather, I found what they tried to erase." Maria's breath caught. Her trembling hands reached for the papers. "What is it?" Hughes leaned forward, lowering his voice until it was almost a growl. "The original DNA report from Ellen's living room?" Maria's eyes scanned the pages. The words swam, clinical and cold. Biological material recovered from broken glass D and a profile inconsistent with suspect Ramirez. Her heart skipped. She reread the line, her pulse pounding. "Not me," she whispered. "It wasn't me." Hughes jabbed a finger at a margin. "That report proves it. Someone else was in Ellen's house, someone who left DNA behind. And instead of investigating that LUD, they buried it. They issued a second doctored report that cut out this result entirely. Do you understand what this means?" Tears stung Maria's eyes, but beneath the flood of relief came a surge of anger. "It means they knew. They knew I didn't do it, and they locked me up anyway." Hughes nodded grimly. "Exactly. They chose to hide exculpatory evidence. That's not just misconduct. That's criminal." But even as the words left his mouth, his expression hardened. The problem is, this copy wasn't easy to find. It wasn't in the official case file. It wasn't even in the DA's discovery folder. I found it buried in an old evidence log, mislabeled as a property receipt. That means someone deliberately tried to make it disappear. And if they know I've seen it, they'll come after me too. Maria's blood ran cold. So what do we do? Hughes exhaled, his hands gripping the table so tightly, his knuckles whitened. "We build a motion. We put this in front of a judge, but timing matters. If we move too soon, they'll find a way to suppress it, to discredit me, maybe even to disbar me. We need to gather more, stack it so high the court can't ignore it." Maria pressed her palms against the glass, her voice shaking with both hope and fear. "Then promise me, Mark. Promise me you won't stop. This is my life. This is Daniel's life." Hughes met her eyes, his voice steady despite the storm in his expression. "I promise. But you need to be careful in here. The moment this surfaces, they'll know you're not rolling over. They'll want you quiet." That night, Maria returned to her cell, clutching the fragile ember of hope Hughes had handed her. But the walls seemed closer, the shadows darker. Carla raised an eyebrow when Maria sat down, whispering, You look like someone just told you a secret worth killing for." Maria flinched, realizing how transparent she must have been. She turned away, but Carla's chuckle followed her. "Don't worry. Secrets never stay buried. Not in here." The next morning, the threats returned. During lineup, a guard leaned close as he shackled Maria's wrists and muttered, "Word of advice. People who dig too deep don't last long." His breath was sour, his smile cruel. Maria's stomach knotted. Was it a warning? A promise? Both? In the recreation yard, Riley found her again. The old man's eyes were sharper than ever as he leaned on his cane. "Heard your lawyers sniffing around. Dangerous game." Maria glared. "You knew Ellen was testifying. Why didn't you? Tell someone sooner?" Riley shrugged, his grin toothless but sinister. "Because telling gets you buried. I like breathing. Don't you?" His words echoed long after he shuffled away. That evening, Hughes called her from his office again, his voice urgent. "Maria, listen. I ran the DNA profile through an independent database. It doesn't match you, obviously, but it does match someone else." Maria's breath hitched. "Who?" Hughes hesitated, lowering his voice. "A man named Victor Hawley. Arrest record for assault, drug charges, multiple priors. And here's the kicker. He's a known police informant. He's worked with Detective Harris before." Maria's heart stopped. "So the police know. They've been protecting him." Hughes's voice was heavy. "That's what it looks like. If Ellen knew, if she was going to testify against him or against Harris for shielding him, that gives motive. And it gives reason to frame you instead. Clean, quiet, convenient." Maria pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a sob. "So they killed her to protect him. And I'm the one paying the price." Hughes's silence was confirmation enough. The following week, at her next court appearance, Maria sat shackled at the defense table as Ada Keller laid out the prosecution's case. He spoke with rehearsed confidence, waving reports, citing fingerprints, brandishing the blurry video still. Not once did he mention the DNA. Not once did he hint at alternative suspects. To the jury pool observing, the story was neat, airtight, damning. Maria clenched her fists under the table, her nails biting into her skin. She wanted to stand up and scream the truth, to shout Victor Hale's name until the rafters shook. But Hughes squeezed her arm, whispering, "Not yet. We'll get our moment." That night, back in her cell, Maria whispered Daniel's name into the darkness. Hope burned faint but real now, but so did fear. If Hughes had found what he shouldn't have, how long before Harris, Collins, or Hawley made their move? How long before the next threat wasn't just a note, but something worse? For the first time since the nightmare began, Maria believed survival was possible. But for the first time, too, she realized survival meant war. The jail smelled like bleach that morning, but the sting of disinfectant couldn't cover the sour dread that had settled in Maria's stomach. Ever since Hughes had revealed the DNA report, her mind hadn't stopped racing. She should have felt relieved, maybe even hopeful, but instead she felt hunted. Because if her lawyer could find what the police had buried, then surely the police knew he'd found it too. And men like Detective Harris didn't forgive Trespasses. 2 days later, Hughes showed up again, and Maria knew before he sat down that something had shifted. He didn't look just tired this time. He looked spooked. He loosened his tie, leaned across the partition, and whispered in a voice that barely carried. "Maria, we're not alone in this anymore." She frowned. "What do you mean?" Hughes slid a folded card across the metal table. It bore a simple embossed seal, Department of Justice. Beneath it, 3 stark letters, FBI. Maria's breath. Caught. The FBI? Hughes nodded. They reached out to me after I ran Victor Hale's DNA. Apparently, he's not just some low-level informant. He's part of a federal investigation. Organized crime, narcotics, trafficking. He's been on their radar for years. And now, with Ellen dead and you framed, the Bureau thinks this case intersects with theirs. Maria's pulse quickened. So they believe me? They believe I'm innocent? Hughes held up a cautioning hand. Slow down. They don't believe anything yet, but they're interested. Which, frankly, is the best thing that's happened? To us. Because if we can show the police suppressed evidence to protect a federal informant, that's not just misconduct. That's obstruction of justice. Maria pressed her hand to her mouth, hope and fear colliding. So what happens now? Hughes exhaled. They're sending an agent. Wants to talk to you. Off the record for now. But Maria listened to me carefully. If you agree, you're stepping into a bigger storm than you can imagine. The local cops already want you crushed. If they find out you're talking to feds, they'll double down. Before Maria could answer, the door opened. A guard stepped in, his expression stone. Time's up. Hughes gathered his papers quickly, but not. Before muttering, think it over. They'll be here tomorrow. That night, Maria barely slept. The whispers in the cell block felt louder, the shadows heavier. Carla leaned over from the next bunk, smirking. Heard the suits are sniffing around you. Careful, sweetheart. Suits don't save people like us. They use us. Maria turned her back, clutching her thin blanket tighter. She didn't want Carla's poison in her ears. But the seed of doubt burrowed anyway. The next morning, she was led not to the usual visiting room, but to a small, unmarked office deep in the jail's administrative wing. A man in his late 30s waited inside, wearing a plain suit and no badge. In sight, he had short dark hair, steady brown eyes, and an air of quiet authority. He extended his hand. Agent Thomas Red. I'm with the Bureau. Maria sat cautiously, her wrists shackled to the chair. Reed wasted no time. I'll be clear. We're investigating Victor Hale. He's been a confidential informant for the local narcotics unit for years, protected by Detective Harris. We believe he's also tied to organized crime figures operating in this district. Your neighbor, Ellen Porter, was scheduled to testify in a hearing connected to that, and then she turned up dead. Maria's heart lurched. So it's true. She was going to testify. Reed nodded. We think so. And now you're sitting here, accused of killing her, while every lead pointing to Hall has vanished. Which raises a question. Are you just collateral damage, or were you deliberately set up to bury the trail? Maria leaned forward, voice trembling. I didn't kill her. Ellen was my friend. She trusted me. They planted my prints. They buried the DNA. Hughes found it. It wasn't me. Reed's eyes didn't waver. I'm not here to judge guilt or innocence today. I'm here to decide whether your case helps us bring down something bigger. If we can prove the police department protected Hale by framing you, we have leverage. But that means risk. Once we move, the people protecting him won't stay quiet. Maria swallowed hard. So what do you want from me? Reed studied her for a long moment. Everything you know. Every detail about Ellen's last days. Every conversation. Every odd thing you noticed. And in return, I'll see what I can do to keep you alive long enough to tell it. As Maria recounted Ellen's last visit, the books, the lemonade, the casual way Ellen had mentioned papers downtown, Reed's jaw tightened. That tracks, he murmured. She was prepping testimony. And if she confided in you, even lightly, that makes you dangerous to them. Which explains the frame. By the end of the interview, Maria felt wrung out, her throat raw. Reed stood, gathering his notes. You've given me enough to push forward. I'll be in touch. But Maria don't mention me to anyone. Not Hughes. Not the guards. No one. If word leaks, you won't make it to trial. His words hung in the air long after he left. A lifeline and a threat woven into one. That evening, when Hughes returned, Maria bit her tongue bloody not to mention Reed. She wanted to trust Hughes needed to, but Reed's warning echoed. Number 1. So instead, she listened as Hughes laid out plans to subpoena the DNA, to pressure the DA. But all she could think was, I'm in the middle of 2 wars now. One local, one federal, and both could kill me. The retaliation came faster than she expected. 2 nights later, as Maria lined up for head count, another inmate slammed into her, whispering harshly, "Shut your mouth, Ramirez, or the kid's next." Maria staggered back, heart lurching. She scanned the faces around her, but no one looked. Her way, the guard ignored it. She spent the rest of the night curled in her bunk, silent tears soaking her pillow. Somewhere outside these walls, powerful men were playing games with lives like hers, like Ellen's. Somewhere, files were being shredded, reports falsified, truths buried. And now, the FBI was circling. She didn't know if they were saviors or scavengers, but she knew one thing. The ground beneath her feet was cracking, and when it collapsed, she had to be ready to grab onto something stronger than fear dot as the lights flickered out for lockdown. Maria whispered Daniel's name into the dark. She couldn't promise him safety. She couldn't promise him freedom. But she promised herself one thing. She would not go quietly into the role they had written for her. If they wanted to silence her, they would have to bury the truth alongside her. The storm finally broke over the city that night. Thunder rattling windows, rain slashing the streets like knives. But inside the county jail, the air was heavier than the storm outside. Maria could feel it pressing against her chest, a suffocating weight that had nothing to do with weather. She'd felt eyes on her all-day guards, lingering a second too long, inmates falling silent as she passed. Something was shifting, tightening, and she didn't know if it was because Hughes had found the DNA or because the Bureau had stepped into her story. She was still turning it over in her mind when the guard called her name. Ramirez. You got a legal visit. The words usually gave her a flicker of hope. But tonight, when she stepped into the visitor's room and saw Hughes, her stomach dropped. He looked shaken, almost rattled out of his skin. His tie was loose, his eyes bloodshot, his hands gripping his briefcase as if it were a lifeline. Mark? She whispered. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. They know, Maria. They know I have the DNA report. Someone broke into my office. Last night, files turned over, desk ransacked. The report copy is gone. Maria's heart lurched. Gone? But you still have scans, right? Hughes nodded, but his voice was grave. Yes, on a secure drive. But the message was clear. They can get to me. They can erase things. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about silencing anyone who helps you. Before Maria could respond, Hughes slid a flash drive across the table. But that's not the only reason I'm here. I met with someone, quietly, a contact through the Bureau. They shared something with me. He paused, scanning the room, lowering his voice to a whisper. They've got video, Maria. Surveillance footage. Not from Ellen's house. From your house. Maria's breath froze in her chest. My house? Hughes nodded. An off-the-books security camera. Long story short, one of your neighbors was paranoid, had cameras pointed at the street, backed up to a cloud server. He never told anyone, not even the police. But the FBI found it when they started sniffing around Hall. And you know what it shows? His voice cracked. It shows 2 uniformed officers walking up your driveway the night of Ellen's murder. They weren't knocking on your door. They were carrying a bag. and they walked out a few minutes later, empty-handed. Maria's vision blurred. "Oh, my God." Hughes's voice hardened. "That bag, Maria. That's how your fingerprints got into the crime scene file. They planted evidence. They put you in Ellen's living room without you ever stepping foot there that night. The whole thing, it's a setup." For a moment, Maria couldn't breathe. Her chest clenched. Her hands shook so hard she had to grip the table. "So it's true. They planted it. I wasn't crazy." Hughes shook his head firmly. "You were never crazy. They just wanted you to think you were powerless. But now we have proof. Hard proof. Video doesn't lie." Maria's eyes filled with tears, not of fear this time, but of vindication. "Then we can show it to the judge. We can end this." Hughes grimaced. "It's not that simple. The Bureau can't release the footage yet. It's part of their wider investigation into Holly. If it leaks too soon, the whole case could collapse. They want to time it right, use it when it hits hardest. Which means we still have to survive the in-between." Maria slumped back, the brief hope draining as quickly as it had surged. "So I stay locked up while they play their games." Hughes's voice softened. "I'll keep pushing. I'll keep it alive in motions and hearings. But Maria, you need to hold on. You need to stay safe." That night, Maria returned to her cell with the knowledge buzzing like fire in her veins. They had proof. Finally, undeniable proof. But proof that sat locked away, out of reach, while her life continued to crumble. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the image Hughes had painted. Cops in her driveway, carrying a bag, walking out empty-handed. She could see it like a movie in her head, and with every replay, her fear deepened. If they could do that to her, they could do it to anyone. The retaliation came faster than she expected. The next morning, during breakfast, an inmate slid onto the bench beside her. Maria had seen her before, a broad-shouldered woman with tattoos curling up her neck. She leaned close, her voice low and cold. "Word is you're talking too much. Word is you got people digging where they shouldn't." Maria stiffened, her spoon frozen mid-her. "I don't know what you're talking about." The woman smirked. "Then you won't mind if I tell your boy he should watch his back." Maria's stomach lurched. "Stay away from my son?" The woman laughed and stood, walking away without another word. Maria sat trembling, bile rising in her throat. Every corner of the jail felt poisoned, every face a potential knife in the dark. When Hughes returned 2 days later, he looked even worse. His hand shook as he poured himself a paper cup of water. "Maria," he whispered, "they tried to run me off the road last night." Her blood went cold. "What?" Hughes nodded, his voice ragged. "Coming back from the office. Black's UV. No plates. Forced me into the guardrail. I barely made it out." He rubbed his temples. "This isn't just about you anymore. They're escalating. They want me silent, too." Maria gripped the glass. "Then we can't stop. If we stop, they win. Ellen died for this. We can't let them bury her twice." Hughes looked at her, eyes hollow but burning with the same fire. "I know. That's why I brought you this." He slid another document across the table. "It's an affidavit draft. If anything happens to me, it names names. Harris, Collins, Halle. It references the video, the DNA, everything. I've hidden copies. If they take me out, it goes public." Maria's hands shook as she clutched the paper. "Mark, this is dangerous." He gave a bitter laugh. "Dangerous is already the water we're drowning in. At least this way, they know I won't go quietly." Back in her cell, Maria stared at the affidavit, her heart heavy. Every line on that paper was a lifeline and a death sentence. It meant Hughes was all in. It meant there was no turning back. That night, Carla leaned over in the dark, her whisper cutting like a blade. "You're playing with fire, sweetheart. Don't be surprised when the whole house burns." Maria closed her eyes, clutching the affidavit to her chest, whispering Daniel's name like a prayer, because now it was clear. This wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about survival in a war where the truth was ammunition, and the first casualty was always the innocent. And somewhere, on a server in some federal office, sat a video that could save her life, if only it survived long enough to be seen. The jail was louder than usual that morning, a chaos that echoed through the concrete halls. Metal doors slammed harder, guards barked sharper orders, inmates shouted louder than usual. Maria sat on the edge of her cot, her stomach knotted. Every sound made her flinch now. Ever since Hughes told her about the planted evidence, she had been living in a state of permanent tension, waiting for the next blow. And inside, she could feel the other women circling her, their whispers sharper, their stares colder. The threats weren't subtle anymore. They were a rhythm in her day, a constant reminder that someone wanted her to keep her mouth shut. She thought about Daniel constantly. What was he doing at that exact moment? Was he safe with strangers in the foster system? Or was he scared and asking for her? Every time her mind went there, her throat closed. She would not cry in here. Crying was weakness. And weakness was blood in the water. That afternoon, Hughes appeared for their usual meeting, but this time, his face wasn't just tired or shaken. It was pale, almost ghostly, but his eyes carried something Maria hadn't seen in weeks, a spark of cautious hope. He sat down quickly, leaned forward, and spoke in a near whisper. "Maria, someone came to me last night?" Maria's pulse jumped. "Who? A cop?" "Well, not a detective, a records clerk. Young guy, fresh out of the academy. His name's Tyler Grant." Hughes lowered his voice even further, his eyes darting toward the corners of the room as if microphones sprouted from the walls. "He works in evidence management at the precinct, and he says he saw things he wasn't supposed to." Maria leaned closer, her shackles scraping against the table. "What did he see?" Hughes's lips tightened. "He says he was working late the night after Ellen's murder. Harris and Collins came in with a bag. They bypassed logging protocol, told him to sign off without opening it. He said when he peeked later, it contained glass shards in a sealed container and a fingerprint lift already labeled with your name. The problem? It was logged as being collected before the murder was officially processed." Maria's stomach dropped. "They planted it, and he knows." Hughes nodded. "Exactly. Tyler said he didn't know what to do. He was scared. But when he saw the press conference last week, when he saw you paraded as the killer, he couldn't take it anymore. He tracked me down, slipped me a note. We met in a diner off the interstate. He told me everything." Maria's breath came fast, hope and terror colliding. "So he'll testify? He'll go on record?" Hughes's expression darkened. "That's the problem. He's terrified. He says if Harris or Collins even suspect he talked, he's finished. He asked me not to record, not to write his name down. He's considering witness protection, but that only happens if the feds step in officially. For now, all I have is his word. Valuable, yes, but fragile. If he backs out, it vanishes." Maria gripped the table, her knuckles white. "We need him. He's the first one. The first person inside willing to tell the truth. We can't lose him." Hughes nodded grimly. "I know. That's why I told Reed. He's setting up a meeting with Tyler. Off the books. If we can get him under federal protection, his testimony could blow this whole case open." Maria sat back, her heart racing. For the first time in weeks, she felt the tiniest crack of light breaking through. A person, a real living person willing to say what she'd known all along, that she'd been framed, But even as the hope sparked, fear crept back in. Mark, what if they find him first? Hughes's silence was answer enough. That night, Maria returned to her cell with her mind spinning. Carla noticed immediately. "You look different," she said with a sly smile, her voice a purr. "Did your lawyer give you a miracle?" Maria forced her expression into stone, shaking her head. "Nothing. Same as always." But she knew. She wasn't fooling Carla. The woman had predator's eyes. She thrived on weakness and secrets. Later, in the dark silence of lockdown, Maria whispered Ellen's name like a prayer. Maybe, just maybe, the truth Ellen had died for was finally clawing its way to the surface. 2 days later, Hughes returned, and this time he brought news that made Maria's heart lurch. The Bureau met with Tyler. He's agreed to cooperate. They're working on moving him into protection. But Maria, there's more. Her pulse hammered. More? Hughes leaned forward, his voice hushed but urgent. Tyler claims Ellen wasn't just preparing to testify against Holly. She had documents. Files she collected. Notes he overheard. Harris talking about cleaning out the Porter house before the official search. Which means evidence from her home. Evidence that might have named names never made it into the record. Maria's eyes widened. They stole it. They stole Ellen's evidence. Hughes nodded. If Tyler's telling the truth, then yes. And if we can prove that, it's not just misconduct. It's conspiracy. It could take down the whole precinct. Maria's breath came fast, her mind racing. For the first time, she imagined something she hadn't dared. Harris and Collins in handcuffs, their smug faces finally stripped of power. But even as the hope swelled, Hughes's voice dropped lower. "Maria, there's a risk. If they know, Tyler's talking. He's as good as dead. And if they suspect you know about it, they'll come for you harder than ever. You need to be ready." Maria closed her eyes, her hands trembling on the table. "I've been ready since the night they knocked on my door." Back in her cell, she sat on her cot, staring at the cracked ceiling. For weeks, she'd felt like she was drowning in a storm with no lifeline. But now, for the first time, someone had thrown her a rope. Fragile, fraying, maybe ready to snap, but a rope nonetheless. Still, one thought gnawed at her as she drifted into restless sleep. Ropes can be cut. And if Harris knew Tyler Grant had opened his mouth, he'd cut it without hesitation. The county jail's concrete walls seemed to pulse with tension the following week, as if even the building knew something was unraveling outside. Maria felt it in the air, a static charge that never left her skin. She didn't know the details, but she could tell Hughes was holding back something heavier than usual. Every time he visited, his eyes scanned the room, his voice dropped lower, and his hands trembled just slightly when he reached for his papers. It wasn't until Wednesday evening that he finally told her. He leaned in so close that their foreheads almost touched through the glass partition. "Maria, Tyler's in danger." Her blood froze. What happened? Hughes rubbed his temples, his voice strained. The Bureau got him into a safe house outside the city. But someone leaked. Harris and Collins were asking around precinct records about him, trying to find out who's been talking. Reed told me Tyler barely made it out of his apartment. Alive, someone had broken in, tossed the place, probably looking for proof. If he hadn't already been moved, he'd be gone. Maria's stomach twisted, bile rising. They know. They know he's the one. Hughes nodded grimly. They suspect. And that's enough. If they catch him, he's finished. Which means the clock is ticking on us too. If Tyler disappears, so does everything he told us. Maria gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. You can't let that happen. Please, Mark. He's the only one who stood up. He can't die for this. Hughes's eyes darkened. That's what I've been telling. Reed, But the Bureau plays their own game. They don't care about you as much as they care about building a case that sticks. Tyler is valuable to them, but only if he stays alive. And right now, they're not sure they can guarantee that. That night, Maria lay awake in her cot, staring at the ceiling until the shadows blurred. Every creak in the hallway sounded like boots coming to take her away. Every echo of footsteps made her think of Tyler, hidden away in some room, waiting for a knock that could mean safety or death. She whispered his name into the dark, like Ellen's before it. Another soul dragged into the web she hadn't asked for. The following morning, word spread through the jail like wildfire. A guard passed a newspaper under his arm, headlines bold. Across the front, police informant under investigation. Maria's heart slammed. She couldn't see the article, but the whispers told her enough. People knew. Tyler's cover was cracking. Carla slid onto the bench beside her in the cafeteria, grinning like a cat with blood on its teeth. I hear one of your little friends is singing outside. Word is, the cops don't like it. Word is, his song is about to get cut short. Maria's spoon clattered against the tray. You don't know what you're talking about. Carla smirked. Don't I? Secrets don't stay secrets, sweetheart. Not in here. Not out there. Maria shoved her tray away, her appetite gone, but Carla's words gnawed at her. Secrets never stayed buried. And maybe Tyler's bravery had just painted a target the size of a house on his back. When Hughes visited that afternoon, he looked worse than ever. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his face unshaven. He dropped into the chair across from her, his shoulders sagging. Maria, they tried to grab Tyler last night. Her heart leapt into her throat. What? Is he... He's alive, Hughes said quickly, but just barely. 2 men followed him from the safe house when the FBI rotated him. They boxed him in at a gas station. Luckily, Reed had an unmarked tail car shadowing the move. Shots were fired. Tyler shaken, but safe for now. The Bureau moved him again, deeper this time. But Maria, this can't hold. Every time they move him, they risk exposure. Every time, the circle tightens. Maria pressed her forehead against the glass partition, her breath fogging it. So they'll kill him. It's only a matter of time. Hughes's. Silence was worse than an answer. Finally, he whispered, unless we move faster than them. Unless the Bureau stops playing chess and plays war. The next days blurred into each other. Maria tried to focus on survival, inside avoiding Carla's smirks, ignoring the scribbled threats on her meal trays, keeping her back to the wall in the yard. But her thoughts were always on Tyler. She pictured him in some hidden motel room, staring at the door, waiting for footsteps that might never come. She hated herself for feeling relieved it wasn't her. Hated herself for knowing it easily could be. One evening, during mail call, Maria received a letter without a return address. Her heart pounded as she unfolded it. The handwriting was hurried, slanted. They can't bury it forever. Stay alive. Stay strong. The truth has teeth. No signature. No name, but somehow Maria knew. Tyler had written it. Her hands trembled as she folded it back, tears stinging her eyes. Someone else was in the fight. Someone else believed she wasn't just another name on a file. And that sliver of solidarity was enough to keep her standing through another night. But the war outside was escalating. Hughes confirmed it the next day. The FBI's pulling data from precinct servers. Reed says they found traces, deleted files, shredded reports, everything Tyler hinted at. They're piecing it together. If they succeed, it could blow the whole department open. Maria's breath caught. Then we win. Hughes shook his head, his eyes heavy. If we make it that far. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. Maria, listen, I need you to prepare yourself. The more desperate they get, the more dangerous it becomes. Harris and Collins are cornered animals now. They won't go down quietly. And if they think you're the match that lights the fire, they'll find a way to snuff you out. Don't trust anyone, not even the guards. Maria's heart pounded as she returned to her cell that night. The letter pressed against her chest like a talisman. Tyler's words seared into her mind. The truth has teeth, but she also knew teeth could bite both ways. And as the storm raged louder outside the walls, Maria wondered if truth itself might devour them all before it ever set her free. The courthouse was buzzing long before Maria arrived. Reporters crowded the steps, their microphones pointed like weapons, their voices raised in a chorus of speculation. The story had gripped the city for weeks. A single mother accused of murdering. Her elderly neighbor, a case that had seemed airtight until cracks began to show. Now, with whispers of corruption, missing files, and federal intervention, the entire city wanted to see what would happen when the curtain was finally pulled. Maria stepped out of the transport van, shackled at the wrists and ankles, flanked by deputies. The October air bit cold against her skin, but her heart beat hotter than it had in months. She felt the stares, the cameras, the judgment of strangers, but for the first time she wasn't shrinking under it. She was walking into battle. Inside, the courtroom was already packed. Hughes sat at the defense table, stacks of files and binders neatly arranged, his expression taut but determined. Across the aisle, Ada Keller whispered to Detectives Harris and Collins, who sat rigid, their eyes darting nervously toward the gallery. Victor Hall, the informant whose name had haunted Maria's nightmares, was nowhere to be seen. When the judge entered, the room rose and fell into silence. The trial began with the prosecution, as always, painting the same tired picture. Maria, jealous or unstable, lashing out against her kind neighbor. Fingerprints, a blurry video, a neat narrative. Keller spoke with confidence, but Maria noticed the sheen of sweat on his brow, the way his voice cracked when he forced certainty where doubt now lived. Then it was Hughes's turn. He stood, his voice steady, commanding. "Your Honor, members of the jury, today you will see the truth. You will see not just that Maria Ramirez is innocent, but that she was deliberately framed to protect men who abused their badges." Prosecution objected, but the judge allowed Hughes to continue. That's when it began. Piece by piece, the wall of lies started to crumble. First came the DNA report. Hughes presented the original copy, recovered from a mislabeled file, showing the biological material at Ellen Porter's home did not match Maria. He read the line aloud, his voice sharp as a blade. DNA profile inconsistent with suspect Ramirez. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Keller shifted uncomfortably. Next, Hughes introduced Tyler Grant. The young records clerk walked nervously to the stand, his hands shaking, his voice quivering at first. But then he steadied, his eyes fixed on the jury. He told them about the night Harris and Collins walked in with a bag, how they forced him to sign off without inspection, how he later peeked and saw evidence already tagged with Maria's name. He told them about Ellen's missing files, about whispers in the precinct halls, about the culture of silence that kept him terrified until he could no longer bear it. Keller tried to tear him apart on cross-examination, painting him as inexperienced, unreliable, but Tyler didn't break. "I may be young," he said, his voice trembling but resolute, "but I know what I saw. And I know the difference between justice and corruption. What they did to Maria was corruption." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged the gavel, calling for order. Maria's chest swelled with something she hadn't dared feel in months, vindication. But Hughes wasn't finished. He called Agent Reed to the stand. The FBI agent testified calmly, methodically, producing digital evidence recovered from precinct. Servers, deleted logs, altered timestamps, shredded reports. Each piece lined up perfectly with Tyler's story. Then Reed dropped the hammer. Surveillance footage from the neighbor's off-the-books security camera. The video played on the screen. Grainy but unmistakable. Two uniformed officers, Harris and Collins, walked up Maria's driveway carrying a bag. Minutes later, they walked out empty-handed. Silence gripped the courtroom. Harris shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched. Collins stared at the floor. The jury leaned forward, their eyes wide. The video spoke louder than any lawyer ever could. Hughes turned back to the jury. This is the setup. This is how an innocent woman was nearly buried under lies. And ask yourself this. If they were willing to plant evidence against Maria, what else were they willing to do? Who else have they buried? Keller stammered through objections, but the momentum had shifted. The judge allowed Hughes to proceed. Finally, Hughes called Maria herself. She stood, shackles removed for the testimony, and walked slowly to the witness stand. Her voice shook at first, but then it strengthened, carrying years of pain and weeks of fear. She told them about Ellen's last visit, the lemonade, the books, the knock at her door. She told them about the threats in jail, the ketchup scrawled on her food trays, the note warning her that her son would pay. And then she looked directly at the jury. All I've wanted is to go home to my son. I didn't kill Ellen. She was. My friend, they tried to make me into something I'm not, because it was easier than facing the truth. But I'm not afraid anymore. The truth is here. You can see it. And I'm asking you to see me. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't break. She stood firm, her voice clear. The jury watched her in silence, their faces unreadable, but Maria could feel something shifting. Closing arguments came quickly. Keller's voice was tight, desperate, clinging to the fingerprints, to the video that now seemed laughable next to the mountain of exculpatory evidence. Hughes, in contrast, spoke like a man delivering a verdict the system had tried to steal. Justice is not about convenience. It is not about protecting powerful men at the expense of the powerless. Justice is about truth. And today, the truth is clear. Maria Ramirez is innocent. When the jury filed out, Maria sat trembling, her hands clenched in her lap. Every second felt like a lifetime. Hughes squeezed her shoulder, whispering, "No matter what happens, you fought. Remember that." Hours later, the jury returned. The foreman stood, his voice steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Maria Ramirez, not guilty." Maria's knees buckled. She gasped, covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Hughes caught her, steadying her as the courtroom erupted in noise shouts, gasps, reporters rushing out to file stories. The judge banged the gavel, but Maria barely heard it. She was free. As deputies removed her shackles, she looked across the room. Harris's face was red, his jaw tight. Collins muttered something under his breath. And in the gallery, Agent Reed's expression was calm, knowing. The storm wasn't over, not for them. The Bureau would see to that. But for Maria, the nightmare had finally broken. Outside, the cameras flashed, the crowd roared. Maria stepped into the sunlight for the first time in months. Hughes at her side. She closed her eyes, feeling the air on her skin, hearing Daniel's name echo in her heart. She would see him again. She would hold him again, and she knew Ellen's voice hadn't been silenced in vain. Weeks later, the headlines shifted. Harris and Collins were indicted on charges of obstruction and evidence tampering. Victor Hyde disappeared into custody. His name splashed across federal indictments. And Maria Ramirez walked free, hand in hand with her son, the weight of injustice. Slowly lifting, but never forgotten. In a quiet moment, she sat on her porch, Daniel's laughter filling the air. She looked into the horizon and whispered, "We survived. We told the truth, and the truth had teeth." And somewhere deep down, Maria knew that sharing her story mattered, that people listening, people watching, could see what it cost to fight for justice and what it meant to survive it. Because sometimes survival isn't the end. It's the beginning of something bigger.